She was sleeping in her car, down to her last $150, and desperate enough to gamble it all on an abandoned storage unit. What she found hidden under moth-eaten blankets wasn't just a way out of poverty. It was a $90 million secret that someone was willing to kill for. The rain in Portland, Oregon has a way of seeping into your bones, but for 34-year-old Selena Jenkins, the chill was already there. It had been residing in her chest ever since the bank foreclosed on her modest duplex 6 months prior. Selena wasn't a gambler, nor was she irresponsible. She was a former pediatric nurse whose life had been systematically dismantled by a ruthless sequence of tragedies. Her husband David's terminal illness, the staggering, insurmountable medical debt that insurance refused to cover, and finally, the grief that had cost her her job. Now, her entire universe was confined to the damp interior of a 2008 Honda Civic, parked under the flickering amber glow of a street lamp behind a desolate strip mall. It was a Tuesday morning, and Selena's bank account held exactly 156.42 cents. She hadn't eaten a hot meal in 3 days, surviving on generic peanut butter and stale bread. Desperation is a potent catalyst. It bypasses logic and taps directly into primal survival. That was the only explanation for why Selena found herself standing in the miserable drizzle outside Safe Haven Storage, a crumbling facility on the industrial outskirts of the city, clutching her damp canvas wallet. Safe Haven wasn't the sort of place that attracted reality television crews. There were no polished auctioneers or dramatic bidding wars over pristine antique furniture. It was a graveyard of broken dreams, unpaid rent, and forgotten lives. The facility manager, a gruff, chain-smoking man named Bill Henderson, ran the monthly lien auctions with the enthusiasm of a coroner. Selena stood at the back of a small cluster of professional scavengers, grizzled men in heavy work boots and Carhartt jackets, who made their living buying cheap units and flipping scrap metal. Among them was Arthur Burlington, a local pawn shop owner with a reputation for being as predatory as a loan shark. Arthur had a thick, graying beard and cold, calculating eyes. He knew the storage game inside and out, and he had a knack for smelling value. "All right, listen up," Bill barked, his voice raspy from decades of nicotine. "Rules are the same as always. You get 5 minutes to look from the threshold. You don't cross the line, you don't touch the boxes. Cash only. You buy it, you sweep it clean by tomorrow night." The first 3 units were a bust for Selena. Arthur snapped them out for a few $100s each, spotting high-end power tools and vintage stereo equipment buried beneath the clutter. Selena felt a crushing weight pressing down on her. Her $150 was nothing here. It was a joke. She was freezing, her shoes were soaked through, and the agonizing reality that she was going to starve began to set in. Then, Bill unclasped the heady master padlock on Unit 418. The corrugated metal door groaned in protest as it rolled up, releasing a pungent, suffocating odor of mildew, stale dust, and something sharply metallic, like old pennies. The small crowd huddled around the threshold, shining their tactical flashlights into the gloom. Unit 418 was a 10-by-10 space that looked entirely worthless. There was a rusted mountain bike missing its front wheel, several collapsed cardboard boxes spilling yellowed newspapers, a broken floor lamp, and a massive pile of cheap, rotting canvas tarps draped over bulky, unidentifiable shapes in the back. The walls were stained with water damage. "Looks like a whole lot of dump fees to me," Arthur muttered, spitting on the asphalt and turning his back. "Nothing but trash," the other regulars murmured in agreement, stepping away. Nobody wanted to spend their afternoon hauling wet garbage to the county dump. "Do I have an opening bid of $50? Bill asked, looking at his clipboard. Silence. "Come on, $50. There's scrap metal on that bike frame." Selena's heart hammered against her ribs. She looked at the unit. It was desolate, but her eyes caught something underneath the edge of one of the rotting tarps in the back corner. A sliver of dark, polished wood bound in oxidized brass. It didn't belong with the cheap, rotting cardboard. "50, Selena said, her voice cracked, barely a whisper over the rain. Arthur glanced over his shoulder, eyeing her up and down. He took in her frayed coat, a pale, exhaustive face, and smirked. He wasn't going to bid against a homeless woman for a pile of wet newspapers. "50 to the lady," Bill said. "Do I hear 75? Silence. Going once, going twice. Sold for $50. Bill scribbled on his clipboard and ripped off a receipt. "Pay up at the office, honey. You got 24 hours to clear it out." Selina handed over a crumpled $50 bill. She had $106 left to her name. As she took the new padlock key from Bill, a wave of profound nausea washed over her. What had she just done? She had just traded a week's worth of gas and food for a literal room full of garbage. The other buyers dispersed, moving on to the next row of units. Selina was left alone in the rain, staring into the dark maw of Unit 418. She stepped inside. The air was thick and hard to breathe. Her cheap flashlight beam danced over the debris. She started with the boxes near the front, hoping against hope to find something empty to sell at a pawn shop or a thrift store. But Arthur had been right. It was trash. Decaying issues of National Geographic from 1994. Bags of moth-eaten clothes that crumbled when she touched them. Cheap, broken kitchen appliances. An hour passed. Selina sat on an overturned milk crate in the center of the unit, burying her face in her dirty hands, tears of absolute crushing defeat hot-tracked down her cheeks. She had hit rock bottom, and then she had paid $50 to dig a little deeper. "Okay," she whispered to herself, wiping her eyes with the back of her sleeve. "Just clean it out. Maybe the scrapyard will give you $10 for the metal." She stood up and walked toward the back of the unit, grabbing the heavy, moldy canvas tarp that covered the bulk of the space. With a sharp tug, she pulled it away, coughing as a cloud of dust plumed into the air. Underneath the tarp was not more garbage. It was a heavy, antique steamer trunk. The trunk was massive, measuring at least 4 feet long and 3 feet high. It was constructed of deeply stained mahogany, reinforced with thick bands of black iron that had miraculously survived the dampness of the unit. It looked like an artifact from a bygone century, entirely out of place amidst the waterlogged boxes of the 1990s. Selina approached it slowly, her flashlight beam trembling in her hand. She knelt on the concrete floor, ignoring the dampness seeping through her jeans. On the front of the trunk, secured by 2 heavy-duty modern steel padlocks, was a tarnished brass nameplate. She rubbed the grime away with her thumb. The engraved letters read, "Property of R. H. Sterling." Selina didn't know anyone named Sterling, but she knew that people didn't put dual high-security locks on a heavy iron trunk to protect dirty laundry. A new kind of energy surged through her, not despair, but a sharp, vibrating adrenaline. She needed to get it open. She jogged back out into the rain, sprinting to her Honda Civic. She popped the trunk and retrieved the only tool she owned, a heavy, forged steel tire iron. Returning to the unit, Selina brought the flat end of the tire iron down hard against the hasp of the right padlock. The noise was deafening inside the metal box of the storage unit, echoing like a gunshot. She froze, terrified that Bill or Arthur would come running. But the rain was drumming loudly on the tin roof, masking the sound. She swung again, putting the entire weight of her desperation behind the blow. The rusty metal of the trunk's clasp groaned. On the 4th strike, the hasp splintered, breaking away from the wood. She repeated the process on the left side, her palms blistered and bleeding by the time the 2nd lock gave way. Breathing heavily, her chest heaving, Selina dropped the tire iron. She reached out with shaking hands and lifted the heavy, domed lid of the trunk. A waft of dry, stale air escaped. Unlike the rest of the unit, the inside of the trunk was immaculately sealed and lined with dark crimson velvet. Sitting on top of the velvet was a single, thick, leather-bound ledger. Selina picked it up. It was heavy. She opened the cover and shone her flashlight onto the pages. It wasn't a diary. It was a meticulous, handwritten log of financial transactions. Columns of dates, massive dollar amounts, and routing numbers were neatly penned in black ink. But it was the names beside the numbers that made her breath hitch. These weren't ordinary bank names. Credit Suisse, BCCI, First National Bank of Panama, Beside them were shell company names and dates ranging from 1987 to 1993. On one page, dated October 14, 1991, a single line read, "Transfer to Cayman account 409B, 14,509B. Selina closed the ledger, her hands trembling violently. This wasn't a pawn shop find, this was something dangerous. She set the ledger aside and looked back into the trunk. Beneath where the book had rested were 4 heavy, sealed PVC canisters, each about the size of a fire extinguisher, capped tightly at both ends with industrial sealant. Using a rusty box cutter she had found near the front of the unit, Selina frantically sawed the thick layer of duct tape and sealant on the first canister. It took her 10 agonizing minutes to pry the cap off. She tilted the tube and outslid a tight, heavy bundle wrapped in wax paper and secured with thick rubber bands. The rubber bands had dried out and snapped immediately upon being touched. The wax paper fell away, revealing a stack of stiff, beautifully engraved paper. Selina stared at them, her brain struggling to process the visual information. They looked like oversized currency, intricately designed with elaborate borders and official seals. At the top, in bold, sweeping letters, were the words, "United States Treasury Bearer Bond." In the corner of the top note was the denomination $10,000. Selina thumbed through the stack. There were hundreds of them. Bearer bonds were something she had only seen in old heist movies, financial instruments that were completely untraceable. Whoever physically held the paper owned the money. They were effectively cash, and she was holding millions of dollars in her bare hands. "Oh my God!" Selina whispered, the sound completely swallowed by the drumming rain outside. Oh my God, her mind raced, mind. She could pay off David's medical debts. She could buy a house. She could eat. But alongside the euphoric rush of salvation came a paralyzing wave of terror. People didn't just forget millions of dollars in untraceable bonds in a leaky storage unit in Portland. This money was hidden. It was dirty. If H. Sterling, or whoever owned this, found out she had it, she swallowed hard, forcing herself to keep moving. She reached into the trunk again and found a small, heavy wooden crate wedged next to the remaining 3 PVC tubes. She pried the wooden lid off with the box cutter. Inside the crate, nestled in layers of pure silk, were 6 small individual velvet boxes. Selina opened the first one. The flashlight beam caught the object inside, fracturing into a blinding explosion of iridescent light. It was a diamond, but it wasn't clear. It was a deep, flawless, impossible pink. It was roughly the size of a marble, cut with an antique precision that screamed historical significance. The remaining 5 boxes contained identical stones. Even to an untrained eye, the collection was clearly worth tens of millions. Tucked beneath the velvet boxes was a folded piece of parchment. Selina unfolded it. The handwriting matched the ledger. "To the estate of C. Kensington. The liquidation is complete. The bonds and the stones are secured in Unit 418. I will return for them when the federal heat dies down. Do not contact me. The SSS1. Selina was holding a king's ransom. $90 million, easily. She was no longer a homeless widow. She was the custodian of a massive illicit fortune. She had to get it out. She had to load it into her Civic and disappear before Bill came back to lock the gates, before anyone realized what was inside. She began frantically stuffing the bundles of bearer bonds and the pink diamonds into her worn canvas duffel bag. She was zipping the bag closed when she heard it. Crunch. It was the distinct sound of a heavy work boot stepping on broken glass just outside the roll-up door. Selina froze, the blood draining from her face. She cut the flashlight off, plunging the unit into pitch black. "Well, well, well," a gravelly voice echoed from the threshold. The silhouette of a large man blocked out the dim grey light from the rain-soaked parking lot. Arthur Burlington took a slow drag from a cigarette, the ember glowing bright red in the gloom. He stepped into the unit, a heavy maglite in his left hand and something metallic gleaming in his right. "I thought I told you," Arthur said. a slow, predatory smile spreading across his face as he shone his beam directly onto the shattered locks of the steamer trunk, and then onto Selina's terrified face. That unit was just trash. Arthur took another step forward, blocking the only exit. Looks like you found a little something extra, sweetheart. Why don't you go ahead and hand that bag over? The metallic gleam in Arthur Burlington's right hand wasn't a flashlight. As he stepped fully into the dim perimeter of Unit 418, the dull gray light from the rain-soaked parking lot caught the barrel of a snub-nosed .38 revolver. Selina's breath hitched in her throat. The heavy canvas duffel bag, packed with $90 million in untraceable wealth, suddenly felt like an anchor tying her to the bottom of the ocean. "I've been watching this unit for 3 years, Arthur rasped, his voice vibrating with a dangerous mix of greed and anger. He gestured with the barrel of the gun. "Old Bill told me the rent was being paid by some law firm out of Chicago through a shell corporation. Last month, the checks just stopped. I knew something was in here. I just didn't expect a homeless stray to beat me to the punch." He took another step forward, his heavy boots crunching on the debris. "Slide the bag over, sweetheart, and step away from the trunk. You don't want to die for a box of paper." "Come out, so wild to try." Selina's mind went blank, then instantly flooded with a blinding, primal clarity. She was 34 years old. She had lost her husband, her home, and her career. She had spent the last week shivering in a Honda Civic, contemplating the end of her life. She had absolutely nothing left to lose, and in that agonizing realization she found her weapon. Arthur's eyes flicked down to the duffel bag for a fraction of a second. That was all she needed. With a guttural scream, Selina kicked the overturned plastic milk crate with all her might. It launched through the air, catching Arthur squarely in the shins. As he stumbled backward with a curse, Selina lunged to her left, snatching the forged steel tire iron from the concrete floor. Arthur raised the revolver, but Selina was already swinging. She didn't aim for his head. She swung blindly at his extended arm. The heavy iron connected with Arthur's wrist with a sickening crack. He roared in agony, dropping the gun. It clattered into the dark recesses of the unit, skidding under the rotting canvas tops. "You stupid witch!" Arthur bellowed, clutching his shattered wrist and lunging at her with his good hand. Selina didn't wait. She grabbed the strap of the duffel bag, hoisted it over her shoulder, and bolted. She shoved past Arthur's massive frame, throwing her shoulder into his chest and sending him crashing into the rusted mountain bike. She exploded out of the storage unit into the freezing Portland rain. The asphalt was slick, and her soaked sneakers slipped, but she caught her balance and sprinted toward her 2008 Honda Civic. She could hear Arthur scrambling out of the unit behind her, bellowing her license plate number into the night. Selina threw herself into the driver's seat, locked the doors, and jammed the key into the ignition. The engine sputtered, wheezed, and finally roared to life. She slammed the car into reverse, tires spinning wildly on the wet pavement, before throwing it into drive and tearing out of the safe haven storage gates, leaving Arthur screaming in her rearview mirror. She drove aimlessly for an hour, her hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles were stark white. Every set of headlights in her rearview mirror looked like Arthur. Every siren in the distance sounded like the end of her life. Finally, she pulled into the parking lot of the Starlight Motel, a dilapidated, cash-only establishment in Gresham. She paid for a room with her last $100 bill, carried the heavy duffel bag inside, and threw the deadbolt. Collapsing onto the sagging mattress, Selina opened the bag. The bundles of bearer bonds and the velvet boxes of pink diamonds spilled out. The reality of what she possessed and what she had just done crashed over her. She needed information. She pulled out her cracked smartphone, grateful she had paid the bill 2 weeks ago, and connected to the motel's spotty Wi-Fi. She typed in the name from the trunk's brass plate and the ledger, Richard H. Sterling, Chicago, bearer bonds. The search results loaded, and Selina's blood ran ice cold. Richard the calculator. Sterling wasn't just a wealthy businessman. He was the chief money launderer for the Falcone crime syndicate in Chicago during the late 1980s and early 1990s. In 1993, the FBI launched Operation Iron Vault, a massive raid on the syndicate's financial holdings. Days before the raid, $90 million in bearer bonds intended to pay off the Colombian cartel vanished without a trace. Sterling vanished with them. She added the second name from the parchment, C. Kensington. Charles Kensington was a disgraced jewelry tycoon who had orchestrated a massive insurance fraud scheme in 1991, faking the theft of 6 world-renowned pink diamonds known as the Blush Collection. Kensington died in a federal penitentiary in 1998, swearing he had given the diamonds to a fixer to hide. Selina dropped her phone onto the bed. The money in her bag belonged to the mob, the cartel, and the federal government. Arthur Burlington wasn't her biggest problem. If anyone found out she had the Sterling trunk, she was a dead woman. And Arthur had her license plate. Panic is a thief that steals your ability to reason, but Selina refused to let it take her. She sat in the dim light of the motel room, staring at the illicit fortune. She couldn't cash the bearer bonds. In 2026, bearer bonds were essentially obsolete in legitimate banking. Attempting to deposit or cash millions of dollars of them would instantly trigger a Suspicious Activity Report, SAR, with the Treasury Department, bringing the FBI directly to her door. The bonds were radioactive paper. But the pink diamonds? Diamonds could be recut. They could be fenced overseas. They were portable, untraceable wealth. Selina hatched a plan. It was incredibly dangerous, but it was the only way to get Arthur off her back and secure her future. She spent the next 3 hours wiping down the bearer bonds, the PVC tubes, and the ledger to remove her fingerprints. She carefully repacked the millions of dollars in bonds back into the PVC tubes, leaving them inside the canvas duffel bag. But she took the 6 pink diamonds and sewed them securely into the lining of her heavy winter coat. At 4 a.m., she left the Starlight Motel. She drove her Honda Civic to the Portland Greyhound bus terminal and parked it in the long-term lot. She took the duffel bag full of bonds, rented a secure baggage locker in the terminal, and shoved the bag inside. Then, using a payphone down the street, she dialed the local FBI field office. Federal Bureau Investigation, how can I direct your call? A bored dispatcher answered. I need to report the location of the Richard Sterling bearer bonds from the 1993 Falcone syndicate case, Selina said, masking her voice with a piece of cloth over the receiver. The bonds and the ledger are in locker number 402 at the Portland Greyhound terminal. The locker code is 811-59. She paused, taking a deep breath. But you need to hurry. A man named Arthur Burlington, who runs a pawn shop in the Industrial District, knows about them. He's trying to secure the rest of the stash from Safe Haven Storage, Unit 418. He's armed. She hung up the phone before the dispatcher could trace the call. Selina didn't wait around to watch the fallout. She walked back into the terminal, bought a one-way ticket to Vancouver, British Columbia with the last of her cash, and boarded the bus just as the sun began to peak over the Cascade Mountains. The aftermath unfolded exactly as she had engineered it. 2 days later, sitting in a cheap hostel in Vancouver, Selina watched the international news on a communal television. A headline flashed across the screen, Historic $90 million syndicate bust in Portland. The news anchor detailed how an anonymous tip had led the FBI to recover millions in stolen bearer bonds. The broadcast cut to footage of Arthur Burlington, his arm heavily bandaged and in a sling, being shoved into the back of a federal vehicle outside Safe Haven Storage. He had returned to the unit to strip it of any remaining evidence, only to walk right into an FBI ambush. The authorities stated they were investigating his ties to the historic Falcone crime family. Arthur was out of the picture. The FBI had their historic win. The ghost of Richard Sterling was finally put to rest, and no one even knew the pink diamonds existed. 6 months later, a woman matching Selina's description walked into the private office of a high-end, discreet gem-broker in Antwerp, Belgium. She placed a single, flawlessly cut pink diamond on the velvet appraisal mat. The broker, a man accustomed to dealing with European royalty, gasped at the purity of the stone. Selina walked out of that office with €8 million wired into a secure offshore account in the Cayman Islands. Today, Selena lives in a sprawling oceanfront villa on the Amalfi Coast in Italy. She goes by a different name, speaks fluent Italian, and donates heavily to charities that support homeless women. She still has 5 pink diamonds hidden in a biometric safe behind a Renaissance painting and has study insurance for a rainy day. She occasionally looks out at the crystal blue waters of the Mediterranean, holding a glass of expensive Barolo, and thinks about the freezing rain in Portland. She thinks about the $150 gamble that changed the trajectory of her universe. She learned the hardest lesson of all. Sometimes, hitting rock bottom is the only way to find what's buried beneath it. If Selena's incredible journey from a freezing car to a multi-million-dollar mastermind kept you on the edge of your seat, hit that like button and share this video with your friends. Don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell for more true-life mysteries and astonishing hidden treasure stories. Drop a comment below. Would you have kept the diamonds or turned it all in?